Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Shadow Storyteller. If you enjoy listening to stories before you sleep, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Every story I share is crafted to take you somewhere else, to let your mind drift into a different world right before you close your eyes. Tonight's story takes us to the United States, in the heart of summer, on one of the most celebrated holidays of the year. The title of tonight's story is 4th of July at the Lake in Michigan. It was the summer of 2019, and the air in Michigan felt alive. The sun hung low and golden, stretching over the vast pines that border Lake Charlevoix, a wide and shimmering body of water in the northwestern part of the state. The morning had started quietly. By 10 o'clock, though, the shoreline was already busy with families carrying coolers, folding chairs, and picnic blankets. You could hear the hum of motorboats being prepared, the shouts of children running barefoot on the grass, and the occasional crack of a soda can being opened. Among the crowd was Thomas Hughes, a 38-year-old teacher from Manchester who had moved to Michigan 5 years earlier. He had always been fascinated by how Americans celebrated their national holidays, and this one, Independence Day, was unlike anything he had ever known back home in England. With him was his partner, Emma, a London-born nurse who had flown over to spend a week with him. The two of them had driven north from Detroit the day before, winding along highways that seemed to stretch endlessly, until finally the smell of pine and lake water welcomed them. At exactly noon, the first boat parade began. Wooden speedboats with polished decks, pontoon boats decorated with flags, and even kayaks wrapped in red, white, and blue ribbons glided across the lake. Thomas and Emma sat on the dock, their legs dangling just above the water, and watched as cheers echoed from the shore. A man named Brian, whom Thomas had befriended during his time in Michigan, walked by holding a plate of barbecued ribs and stopped to chat. His laugh was booming, and he insisted that both Thomas and Emma try the food before it got cold. The air carried the smell of grilled meat, sweet corn, and fresh watermelon. A band had set up near the park pavilion, playing classic American rock songs from the 70s and 80s. People swayed along, some dancing, others simply tapping their feet while sipping cold beer. There was a sense of ease, a rhythm to the day that made it feel as if time had slowed down. Later, around 3 in the afternoon, Thomas and Emma decided to join a group of neighbors on the lake for a swim. The water was cool but refreshing, the kind of chill that made you gasp before easing into comfort. They floated on inflatable rings, looking up at the perfect blue sky streaked with thin clouds. From the distance, the sound of jet skis revved, slicing across the water with trails of white foam. By the time evening approached, the mood shifted. Families gathered closer, laying out more blankets, lighting small lanterns, and preparing for the highlight of the day, the fireworks. The band's music slowed, and children, now tired from running all day, curled up on their parents' laps. Thomas noticed the way the lake mirrored the setting sun, painting the water in shades of pink and orange. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, whispering that this moment, right here, felt like something out of a film. The first firework did not come until almost 10 o'clock, when the sky had turned into a deep navy blue. It shot upward with a hiss, before exploding into a cascade of red sparks that seemed to rain down into the water. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by applause. Then another came, this time a golden burst that shimmered like falling stars. The lake reflected every color, doubling the spectacle. Thomas felt a wave of nostalgia, thinking about how different celebrations were back in England. Guy Fawkes Night with bonfires and fireworks in November. Yet here, in the warm air of July, among strangers who treated him like an old friend, he felt at home in a way he hadn't expected. Emma reached for his hand, and together they watched the sky come alive. But as the fireworks continued, one after another painting the night, something unexpected began to unfold at the far edge of the lake. The fireworks were reaching their peak, The sky above Lake Charlevoix painted in red, silver, and green when Thomas noticed a ripple of movement at the far dock. At first, he thought it was just another boat shifting in the water, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw people gathering, their silhouettes lit by the glow of sparklers. The voices were louder there, not in celebration, but in urgency. Emma lifted her head from his shoulder. "Something's happening," she murmured. Thomas stood, brushing grass from his jeans. Brian, who had returned with another plate of food, followed his gaze. "Looks like trouble down there," he said, his tone dropping. Without hesitation, the three of them began moving along the shoreline, weaving through groups still watching the fireworks overhead. When they arrived, the scene unfolded clearly. A small motorboat had drifted too close to the dock. Inside it, a young boy of about 12 was struggling to pull his father back on board. The man had slipped into the water while adjusting the anchor, and though he was conscious, the current kept dragging him away from the boat's side. The boy's voice cracked with panic as he shouted for help. Two men jumped from the dock, wading quickly into the lake. Thomas froze for a moment. He was a strong swimmer, and the thought of diving into the dark water made his chest tighten. But then he saw the boy's desperate eyes. Without thinking further, he kicked off his shoes and followed. Emma shouted after him, her voice barely audible under the roar of another firework exploding above. The water was colder now, the heat of the day gone. Thomas's arms cut clumsily through the surface, his breath quick and shallow. The man was struggling, his arms flailing, head dipping beneath the waves. By the time Thomas reached him, the other two men had already grabbed hold of his shoulders, but they were slipping. Thomas grabbed the man's arm, shouting, "Kick! You need to kick with us." Together, the three of them hauled the man back toward the dock. The boy leaned dangerously over the boat's edge, tears streaking his cheeks, calling, "Dad, Dad, please." Finally, with one last heave, they pushed him up enough for others on the dock to pull him out of the water. Cheers of relief erupted, mixing strangely with the echo of fireworks still blooming overhead. Thomas clung to the edge of the dock, chest heaving. He could feel Emma's hand on his wrist, steadying him as he pulled himself out. Brian slapped his back, muttering, "Bloody hell, mate, didn't know you had it in you." The man coughed violently, water dripping from his clothes, before sitting upright with the help of his son. "Thank you," he gasped, his voice rough. "Thank you all." His son hugged him tightly, refusing to let go. The crowd slowly began to disperse, the tension giving way to renewed celebration. Yet for Thomas, the night had shifted. He sat on the dock, shivering slightly as his wet clothes clung to him, watching the sky erupt with one final grand display of fireworks. Emma wrapped a towel around his shoulders, whispering that she had never been prouder. And while most people around the lake would remember that 4th of July for the fireworks and the music, Thomas knew he would remember it differently. He would remember the faces in the dark, the weight of another man's arm in his grasp, and the way fear and courage had collided in a single moment under the Michigan sky. But the night was far from over. After the fireworks ended and the crowd began to thin, something else stirred in the quiet spaces of the lakefront. Something that would pull Thomas and Emma deeper into a story they hadn't expected to be part of. When the last firework faded and the echo of applause drifted into the trees, the lakefront grew quieter. Families packed away their coolers. Children were carried half asleep to cars, and the band began dismantling their instruments. The smell of smoke from sparklers lingered in the cool night air. Thomas sat still on the dock, his shirt damp against the skin, while Emma rubbed his shoulders with a towel. He could feel his heart slowing down from the rescue earlier, yet a strange unease lingered. The lake, which had looked beautiful under fireworks, now stretched out like a sheet of dark glass, silent and unreadable. Brian yawned and clapped him on the back. "Well, mate, you've had enough excitement for one night. I'm heading out." With that, he walked toward the parking lot, leaving Thomas and Emma alone with only a few stragglers nearby. It was just past midnight when the couple decided to linger a little longer. They walked slowly along the shoreline, the path lit faintly by lanterns that flickered in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called, its haunting cry echoing across the water. Emma slipped her hand into Thomas's. "It feels different now," she whispered, "like the place has changed." They stopped near an old boathouse, its wooden frame creaking softly. The crowd was gone. Only a handful of boats rocked gently against the docks. The stillness was thick, almost heavy. Then Thomas noticed it. A faint light, far out on the water. At first, he thought it was just a lantern on one of the boats. But it wasn't moving. It hovered, low above the surface, glowing pale white against the black water. Emma frowned. "Do you see that?" "Yes," Thomas replied quietly. His voice sounded too loud in the silence. The light wavered, as if swaying in a breeze, though the air around them was calm. Slowly, it began to drift closer to the shore. The reflection shimmered in the ripples, but there was no sound of an engine, no splash of oars. Just silence, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird. A chill ran through Thomas's spine. He'd heard stories about the lake, old local legends Brian had once joked about after a few beers. Lights that appeared at night, unexplained, said it belonged to fishermen long lost in storms decades ago. He had laughed it off back then, but now, standing here, his breath visible in the cooling air, he wasn't laughing. Emma squeezed his hand tighter. "Thomas, maybe we should go back." But Thomas couldn't look away. The light was closer now, bright enough to cast a pale glow on the water's edge. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. Then, for the briefest moment, Thomas thought he saw a figure standing just beneath it, a shape human-like, still and watching. He blinked, and the shape was gone. The light dimmed suddenly, shrinking into nothing, leaving only the black stretch of water. Emma's grip on his hand was trembling. "We saw that, didn't we? It wasn't just me." "No," Thomas whispered, his mouth dry. "We both saw it." The boathouse creaked again, louder this time, as if in response. Somewhere behind them, a twig snapped in the shadows near the trees. Both of them turned, hearts pounding, but the path was empty. The lake was quiet once more, too quiet, as if holding its breath. And Thomas knew, deep down, that the night wasn't finished with them yet. The silence around the boathouse felt almost unnatural, as if the world itself had paused to listen. Emma clung to Thomas's arm, her nails pressing lightly through his damp shirt. The last groups of families had already left the lakefront, and the parking lot lights in the distance flickered like fading stars. Only the occasional ripple against the wooden posts of the dock disturbed the stillness. Thomas tried to steady his breath, but his chest felt heavy. The image of that pale light hovering above the water, and the suggestion of a human shape within it, wouldn't leave his mind. He had always prided himself on being rational, a man of facts and reason, but what he had just seen couldn't be explained away by logic. "Let's go," Emma whispered. Her voice trembled, but her eyes searched his face, waiting for him to agree. "Yes," he said at last, though he found himself glancing back at the dark expanse of the lake again and again as they began to walk away. They hadn't gone more than 20 yards when another sound stopped them cold. A hollow splash, distinct and deliberate, came from near the boathouse they had just passed. Not the playful slap of a fish or the gentle lap of water against the shore, but something heavy, like a body dropping into the lake. Emma froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Thomas," she said softly, "please don't look." But Thomas couldn't help himself. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. At first, he saw nothing but black water and the outline of the boathouse against the faint glow of the moon. Then, from beneath the surface, another light appeared, dimmer this time, greenish, as though coming from deep below. It drifted upward, glowing brighter, before stopping just beneath the waterline. And again, just for an instant, Thomas saw it. A face. Pale, blurred by ripples, but unmistakably human. The eyes seemed to open, staring straight at him, before the image dissolved into nothing. He staggered back, pulling him with him. She let out a muffled cry, and together they hurried along the path toward the main road. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet seemed too loud, echoing through the emptiness. Every shadow between the trees felt alive. Every creak of the dock like a warning. When they finally reached the parking lot, Thomas's old sedan sat alone under the dim streetlight. He unlocked the doors quickly, his hands shaking more than he wanted to admit. Emma slid into the passenger seat, slamming the door behind her as if to shut out whatever might be following. The drive back to the small bed and breakfast they had rented in town was a blur. The headlights cut through the darkness of the country road, illuminating nothing but endless pines on either side. Neither of them spoke, as though words might make the memory too real. Only once they were safely inside their room, the door locked, did Emma finally break the silence. "Thomas, what did we just see?" He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floorboards. "I don't know," he admitted. "I really don't know." He rubbed his face with both hands, tried to shake off the image of the pale figure beneath the water, but it wasn't natural. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, pacing. "When I was little, my grandmother used to tell me stories about will-o'-the-wisps, strange lights that lead people away at night. I thought they were just old tales. But tonight," she stopped, her voice breaking. "Thomas, I don't think it was just a story." They barely slept. Every sound outside, the whistle of the wind through the shutters, the creak of the old wooden building, set their nerves on edge. When dawn finally arrived, with sunlight spilling over the lake and birdsong filling the air, it felt almost absurd that the night had been so terrifying. After breakfast, Thomas insisted on walking back to the lake, though Emma was reluctant. "We need to see it in daylight," he argued, "to know if it was just shadows playing tricks on us." By mid-morning, the lake was already alive again with activity. Families returned to swim, boats crisscrossed the water, and laughter echoed from the park. The boathouse stood quietly at the edge of the shore, weather but ordinary. Children played nearby, tossing stones into the shallows. Nothing about it suggested the strange events of the night before. Still, Thomas felt drawn to it. He stepped closer, peering into the water where he had seen the pale face. The lake's surface was calm, clear enough to see a scattering of pebbles and weeds below. No light, no shadow, no ghostly figure staring back. Just water, shimmering under the morning sun. Emma stood a few steps behind, her arms crossed tightly. "Thomas, please, don't get too close." "I have to," he said. He crouched at the edge of the dock, leaning forward to look deeper. That was when he noticed it. Carved faintly into the old wood of the boathouse wall, half hidden beneath layers of moss, were initials, dozens of them, overlapping, etched by different hands across the years. Some were faded, barely visible, while others looked surprisingly fresh. He ran his fingers across one set of letters, J.R., carved deep in the rest, and beneath it a date, 1974. Emma stepped closer, curiosity momentarily outweighing her fear. "People carve things like that all the time, don't they?" "Maybe," Thomas murmured, but something about these initials unsettled him, the way they clustered together, as though marking something or someone. Later that afternoon, they found Brian again at a small cafe in town. He greeted them with his usual cheer, but when Thomas mentioned the boathouse and the strange lights, Brian's smile faltered. Old stories, he said, lowering his voice. You're not the first to see them. Folks around here say the lake keeps memories. Drownings, accidents, people lost in storms. Some say their spirits never left. The lights are supposed to be signs. Warnings, maybe. Emma shivered. So it wasn't just us? Brian shook his head. Not just you. But most people don't talk about it. Makes tourists nervous. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Back in '74, a man named James Rowe drowned out by that boathouse. He went under during a storm, and they never found the body. Some folks think he's still there, waiting. The initials on the wall flashed in Thomas's mind. J.R. 1974. He swallowed hard. That night, as the town settled back into quiet after the holiday festivities, Thomas and Emma lay awake, listening to the hum of crickets outside. Neither said it out loud, but both knew the same thought lingered between them. What if the light they saw was James Rowe, or whatever remained of him? And what if, for reasons they couldn't yet understand, the lake had chosen to show itself to them? The unease didn't fade. If anything, it deepened, because as the hours ticked toward midnight once more, Thomas noticed something to the thin curtains of their room. A faint glow in the distance, coming from the direction of the lake. It pulsed once, then again, like a silent summons. The second night in Michigan unfolded with a quietness that pressed against the windows of the small bed and breakfast where Thomas and Emma stayed. The July air had cooled after the long, hot day, and the cicadas sang tirelessly outside. Yet, beneath those ordinary sounds of summer, there was something else, a rhythm, a faint pulse of light that came from beyond the trees, from the direction of the lake. Thomas had noticed it first. He had been sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at his shoes when he caught the glow through the curtains. Not steady like the beam of a lamp, not flickering like firelight, but pulsing, slow and deliberate, almost like a heartbeat. Emma was brushing her hair by the mirror when he spoke. "It's back," he said quietly. She stopped mid-stroke, her eyes meeting his in the glass. "Don't say that," she whispered, but her voice betrayed that she already knew. She had seen the faint wash of light against the walls. Too. For a long while they said nothing. The ticking of the old clock on the nightstand filled the silence. Outside, the glow continued, as if waiting for them. Finally, Thomas stood. "I have to know what it is." Emma's brush slipped from her hand. "No, please, Thomas. Last night was enough." He knelt beside her, taking her trembling hands into his. "If we leave tomorrow without facing this, it will follow me. It will follow both of us. You saw it too. We can't pretend it didn't happen." Emma's breath hitched, but she nodded. She knew he was right, though every part of her screamed against it. By 11 o'clock, they were walking down the gravel path that led toward Lake Charlevoix. The bed and breakfast owner had gone to sleep hours earlier, and the little town was hushed, save for the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. The moon was half hidden by drifting clouds, painting everything in shades of gray. The glow grew stronger as they neared the shoreline. Not blinding, not sharp, but steady, spreading across the water like spilled milk. It came from near the boathouse again, the same place where Thomas had seen the carved initials the morning before. They stopped at the edge of the grass, just before the sand. Emma clutched his arm. "It's calling us." Thomas didn't answer. His throat was dry, and his heart hammered in his chest. Slowly, he led her forward until they stood at the water's edge. The lake was unnervingly still. No breeze to stir its surface. No sound of frogs or fish. The glow shimmered just beneath the water, spreading outward in ripples, as though something alive moved beneath. Emma whispered, "It's him. It has to be." Before Thomas could respond, the glow shifted. It stretched upward, rising from the water like mist. And then they saw it, a figure forming within the light. Not solid, not fully human, but shaped like a man, shoulders hunched, head bowed. Its features were blurred, as if hidden behind a veil of water, yet the eyes, dark, hollow pits, were unmistakable. They were staring directly at them. Emma let out a sharp cry, stumbling back. But Thomas stepped forward, against every instinct, drawn closer to the edge of the dock. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling. The figure did not answer, but the air shifted. A cold wind rose suddenly, rustling through the trees and cutting through the warm night. The water beneath the figure bubbled, and from the depths, faint whispers drifted upward. At first, Thomas thought it was a sound of waves, but then words began to form, fragmented, broken. "Help! Still here, can't leave." Emma clutched at his sleeve, tears forming in her eyes. "Thomas, we have to go. Please." But Thomas's eyes were locked on the figure. "What do you want?" he called out, louder this time. The glow pulsed, brighter, then dimmer, like the beating of a heart. And again the whispers came. "Remember me, lost alone." Thomas's mind raced. The initials on the boathouse. Jr. 1974. James Rowe. The man Brian had told him about. Could this be him? Could this be what the lake had kept all these years? Emma was pulling at him now, desperate to flee. But before they could move, the figure lifted its head. The blurred face turned fully toward them. And for the first time, the features sharpened just enough for Thomas to see. Waterlogged skin, hollow cheeks, eyes filled with sorrow so deep it seemed endless. And then it spoke, clear as the night air. "Find me?" The light collapsed inward, vanishing in an instant. The lake was dark once more, the surface undisturbed, as though nothing had ever been there. Emma sobbed, burying her face against his chest. Thomas held her, though his own body shook violently. He stared out at the black water, his mind echoing with those two words. "Find me." They staggered back to their room, but sleep was impossible. Every creak of the building, every brush of wind against the shutters carried a memory of that voice. By morning, they both looked pale and hollow, like survivors of a storm no one else could see. Over breakfast, Brian noticed their silence. "You two look like you've seen ghosts," he joked. But when Thomas told him what they had heard, the color drained from Brian's face. "James Rowe," he muttered, almost to himself. "It has to be." His family searched for him for weeks after he went under, but they never found him. Some said he got tangled in the weeds, pulled down where no one could reach. Others said the lake took him. Folks stopped talking about it after a while. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If he asked you to find him, maybe he's still there, waiting." Emma shook her head violently. "No, we're leaving. We're not getting pulled into this." But Thomas couldn't stop thinking about it. The voice had been so clear, so desperate. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a plea. That afternoon, while Emma napped restlessly, Thomas walked back to the boathouse alone. He crouched near the water's edge, staring into the ripples. The initials carved into what seemed sharper now, as if freshly made. He reached out, tracing them with his finger. Jr. 1974. He whispered into the stillness. "Where are you?" The water stirred, just faintly, as though in answer. That night, as the sky darkened once more, Thomas knew he couldn't resist the pull any longer. If the lake wanted him to find James Rowe, then he had to go into the water. And when the glow returned for a third time, stronger than ever, Emma woke to find Thomas standing by the door, car keys in his hand, his eyes distant. "Thomas," she begged, "don't go back there." But his voice was low, certain, as if it wasn't entirely his own. "I have to." The lake, as if breathing, was waiting. The night Thomas decided to return to the lake was different from the others. The summer air carried no warmth, only a damp chill that clung to his skin as he walked down the gravel road. Emma followed him, her steps frantic, her voice shaking as she pleaded with him to stop. The town around them was silent, houses tucked in darkness, but the pulse of light on the horizon, the same strange glow, was waiting, drawing them closer with every step. "Thomas, please," Emma whispered, clutching his arm. "It's madness to go back. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't belong to us. We don't have to be part of it." He paused, turned to look at her. His face was pale in the moonlight, his eyes hollow but determined. "Emma, you heard it. You saw it. It isn't just some story." He asked for help. "If I walk away now, I'll never forgive myself." Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head, but when he started forward again, she didn't let go. She stayed at his side, unwilling to leave him alone in the darkness. By the time they reached the shoreline, the glow was brighter than ever. It spread out from the boathouse, painting the lake in pale light. The water was perfectly still, a mirror reflecting the faint clouds drifting across the moon. The boathouse itself seemed alive, its old beams creaking as though sighing under the weight of years. Thomas stepped onto the dock, his shoes echoing on the worn planks. Emma clung to his sleeve, whispering prayers under her breath. The glow pulsed again, and as before, the figure rose from the water, a shape of light, vaguely human, its blurred face lifting toward them. The whispers began to stir in the air, carrying across the water like a chant. "Find me, find me." Thomas crouched at the dock's edge. "Where?" he called into the night. "Where are you?" The glow shifted, sliding across the lake toward the far side, near the deeper waters where the shoreline curved inward. The figure dissolved into the glow, and the light sank beneath the surface, leaving only a faint shimmer that seemed to mark a path. Emma tightened her grip on his arm. "No, you're not going in there." But Thomas was already pulling off his shoes, his jaw clenched. "I have to. He's there, waiting." Emma's hand shook as she tried to stop him, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, sobbing softly. "If you go, I'm staying right here. Don't make me watch you disappear." He kissed her hair, lingering for a moment, then slipped out of her grasp. The water was icy as he waded in, the cold biting through his skin. He gasped, but forced himself forward deeper until the lake reached his chest. The faint shimmer ahead beckoned him, glowing just beneath the surface. With one final breath, Thomas dove under. The world beneath the lake was silent, muffled, the surface above only a wavering blur of moonlight. He swam toward the glow, his arms heavy, his lungs already aching. The light grew stronger as he descended, spreading to the murky water like fireflies trapped in glass. And then he saw it, a shape tangled in the weeds at the bottom. Human, skeletal, the remains of someone who had been down here for decades. The skull tilted upward, empty socket staring into the dark. Around its wrist glimmered something faintly metallic. A watch, corroded but still intact. Carved into the back was a set of initials. GR. Thomas's chest burned with the need for air, but he couldn't look away. The glow gathered around the bones, and for a moment he saw not the skeleton but the figure from above, the blurred man, whole again, his face pale and sorrowful. The hollow eyes softened, and his lips moved silently. Thomas understood, kicking furiously. He reached out, pulling at the weeds that bound the bones. They were thick, resistant, like ropes that had held fast for years. His lungs screamed, but he tore and pulled, until finally the remains shifted free. The glow flared, enveloping the skeleton in light. With a final burst of strength, Thomas pushed upward, dragging the bones with him. His vision darkened at the edges. But then his head broke the surface. He gasped violently, sucking in air, clutching the remains against him. Emma's scream tore through the night. She rushed to the dock, reaching down as Thomas struggled to pull himself up, water pouring off him in streams. Together, they hauled the bones onto the wooden planks, laying them out under the pale moonlight. For a long, breathless moment, they could only stare. The skeleton lay still, the weeds falling away, the corroded watch gleaming faintly. Then, slowly, the glow rose once more. It swirled around the remains, wrapping them in light. The figure appeared again, clearer this time, no longer blurred by water. A man in his late 30s, hair dark and wet, eyes full of both sorrow and relief. He looked at Thomas, then at Emma, and his lips moved, but this time the words came clear. "Thank you." The glow lifted upward, carrying the image of the man into the air. For a heartbeat, the entire lake shimmered, every ripple lit with silver. Then the light collapsed into the night sky, vanishing like smoke. Silence returned. Only the gentle lap of water against the dock remained. Emma knelt beside Thomas, tears streaming down her face. He sat shaking, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his hands trembling as they rested on the dock. The skeleton was gone, the watch lying alone where it had been. "Did you see?" Thomas whispered hoarsely. Emma nodded, unable to speak. They sat together until dawn, watching the skies slowly brighten over Lake Charlevoix. The world seemed untouched, as if the night had been a dream. But the watch on the dock was proof it had been real. By morning, they returned to town and gave the watch to the local sheriff, who listened with wide eyes as they explained. He didn't laugh or dismiss them, but only nodded gravely, as though he had long suspected the truth. The news spread quietly, whispered in cafes and shops. James Rowe, the man lost in 1974, had finally been found. His family, long scattered, would be told. And the lake, it seemed, had released him at last. For Thomas and Emma, the memory would never leave. They had come for fireworks, for summer, for a holiday on the water. Instead, they had stepped into a story carried by the lake for decades, a story that chose them to finish it. Even years later, whenever they closed their eyes, they could still see the glow rising from the dark water and hear the faint whisper carried across the night. "Find me." And they had. The silence by the boathouse was unsettling. Thomas and Emma stood frozen for a while, their breaths shallow, the night air brushing coldly against their skin. The glow that had appeared on the water moments ago was gone, yet its absence felt heavier than its presence. The surface of the lake lay still, smooth like black glass, broken only by the occasional ripple from some unseen fish. It was almost as if the lake itself was hiding something. Emma held onto Thomas's arm tightly. "We shouldn't stay here," she said softly, her voice quivering. "Let's go back to the cabin." But Thomas felt rooted to the spot. His mind replayed the light over and over, the figure beneath it, that fleeting glimpse of something not quite human, and yet human enough to unsettle him. He thought of the old legends Brian had once teased him with, about men lost to the water, bodies never recovered, spirits that wandered the shoreline. He had dismissed them as drunken campfire tales. But now here, under the vast Michigan sky, those tales felt less like stories and more like warnings. Another sound broke the silence. A faint splash, deliberate, from somewhere beyond the dock. Both of them turned, straining their eyes into the darkness. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, a ripple appeared, moving toward them. Not wide, not as if from a boat, but narrow, cut into the water like someone, or something, was swimming. Emma stepped back. "Thomas, please," she urged, tugging his hand. He finally nodded, letting her pull him away from the boathouse. They walked quickly along the dirt path that hugged the lake, their footsteps crunching against gravel and fallen twigs. The lanterns hanging from posts barely lit the way, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to move with them. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of the trees felt amplified. By the time they reached the cabin, tucked behind a cluster of pines about 5 minutes from the shore. Emma's nerves were frayed. She shut the door quickly and locked it, drawing the curtains across the small windows. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine wood and smoke from the earlier barbecue. The silence inside was safer, but also claustrophobic, as if the walls were listening. Thomas sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "I swear I saw someone," he muttered. "It wasn't just a light." Emma sat beside him, her hand resting on his knee. "We saw the same thing. But that doesn't mean we have to understand it tonight. Maybe," she hesitated, "maybe it's one of those things better left alone." They tried to sleep, but sleep did not come easily. Thomas tossed and turned, his mind restless. Around 2 in the morning, he thought he heard something faint outside. Footsteps on gravel, slow, deliberate. He held his breath, listening. But when he finally dared to peek through the curtain, the path outside was empty. Only the tall pines stood guard under the pale light of a waning moon. Morning brought a deceptive calm. The sun rose bright and clear, burning away the night's unease. Birds sang from the trees, and the lake sparkled blue under the July sun, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Families returned to the beach. Children laughed and splashed in the shallows, and the smell of grilled food filled the air once again. It was almost enough to convince Thomas that the night before had been nothing more than exhaustion, mixed with too much excitement and beer. Almost. But Emma was quieter that morning. She lingered at the cabin window, her gaze drifting toward the boathouse. When Thomas asked her what was wrong, she simply shook her head, though her eyes betrayed her unease. Around noon, Brian returned, cheerful as ever. He slapped Thomas on the shoulder, holding 2 cold beers in his hand. "Survived the night, I see. Did the fireworks keep you awake?" Thomas hesitated before answering. "We saw something strange on the lake." Brian laughed. "You and your imagination. What was it? A loon glowing in the dark?" But when Thomas described the hovering light and how it seemed to draw closer, Brian's smile faded. He glanced briefly at the lake, then at Thomas, as if weighing whether to say something. Finally, he shrugged and forced another laugh. Must have been kids with lanterns. Nothing more. Yet his eyes said otherwise. The day carried on, filled with the noise of celebration and the chatter of families enjoying the holiday weekend. But the closer evening drew, the heavier the air seemed to become. Clouds rolled in from the west, turning the sky a darker shade of gray. The lake, once sparkling, grew choppier as the wind picked up. By the time dusk arrived, Emma was restless. She couldn't stop glancing toward the boathouse. "I can't stop thinking about it," she confessed. "What if we weren't supposed to see it?" Thomas frowned. "What do you mean? What if it wasn't random? What if it showed itself to us on purpose?" The thought unsettled him, but he couldn't dismiss it. Something about the way the light had pulsed, the figure beneath it. It hadn't felt accidental. Later that night, after most of the families had gone to bed, Thomas found himself drawn outside again. He told Emma he only wanted fresh air, but in truth, he wanted answers. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of wet pine and earth. He followed the path back to the shoreline, the sound of his footsteps mingling with the whisper of wind through the trees. The boathouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the restless lake. He stopped near the dock, the boards creaking under his weight. The water was darker than ink, the moon hidden behind clouds. For a long while, there was nothing, just a sigh of the breeze and the occasional splash of a fish. Then, slowly it appeared again, the same pale light, hovering above the water. This time, Thomas did not move. His heart raced, but his feet stayed planted. The light pulsed faintly, then shifted, drifting closer, just as it had the night before. And again, faintly, there was a figure beneath it. A face half seen, its features blurred by the glow. "Who are you?" Thomas whispered. His words carried softly across the water. The light flickered, almost in response. Then, to his shock, a voice reached him, distant, echoing, as if carried through water. "Help!" The single word made his blood run cold. It was a plea, desperate, broken. Thomas stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of the dock. His mind raced. He wanted to run, but something in the voice anchored him there. He looked again, and the figure beneath the light seemed clearer now. A man, dressed in what looked like old clothes, water dripping from his form. The face was pale, his eyes hollow. "Help!" The voice came again, louder this time. Thomas's mouth went dry. "How? What do you need?" But before there could be an answer, the light flared brightly, then vanished in an instant, leaving nothing but darkness. The silence that followed was unbearable. Thomas turned and ran, his footsteps pounding the path back to the cabin. Emma was waiting at the door, her eyes wide with worry. "You went back, didn't you?" she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, breathless. "It spoke to me. Something asked for help." Emma stared at him in disbelief, then slowly shook her head. "Thomas, we need to leave this place." But even as she said it, both of them knew it was too late. Whatever was in the lake had seen them, and now it would not let them go so easily. The following day brought no peace. The holiday crowd began thinning, families packing up their cars to return home. By evening, the area around the lake was quieter, emptier, the celebration of freedom replaced by an eerie stillness. For Thomas and Emma, the sense of being watched lingered, whether in the rustling of trees or the rippling of water. And as night came once more, the light returned. The light returned, faint at first, hovering above the black surface of the lake. Thomas stood at the edge of the dock once more, his hands trembling though the night air was still. The pale glow swayed slightly, casting a reflection across the ripples like a lantern carried by invisible hands. It looked fragile, almost delicate, yet there was a weight to its presence that pressed against Thomas's chest. Emma had followed him despite her protests earlier. She stood a few steps behind, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if she could shield herself from what they both knew was about to unfold. Her whisper barely reached him. "Why is it back?" Thomas did not answer. His eyes were locked on the light, his heart pounding so loudly he feared the figure across the water could hear it. And then, as before, he saw the outline of a man beneath the glow. The shape was clearer this time, shoulders rising above the waterline, a head tilted slightly forward, hair plastered the skull as if it had been drenched for years. The voice came again, faint but unmistakable. "Help!" It echoed strangely, as though carried to the lake itself, distorted and hollow. Thomas swallowed hard. His throat was dry, yet he forced out the words. "What do you need?" The figure lifted its face. For the first time, Thomas saw its eyes. They were pale, washed out, yet burning with something desperate. The voice returned, a little stronger. "Find me?" Emma stepped closer, shaking her head vigorously. "Thomas, no. We can't. We shouldn't get involved." Her hand gripped his arm, nails pressing into his skin. But the figure's gaze was fixed on Thomas alone. The pale light flickered, as though straining to stay alive. Then the voice whispered once more. "The boathouse." Beneath, the glow vanished instantly, leaving nothing but the sound of water lapping against the wooden posts. Thomas staggered back, his breath ragged, as if the sudden darkness had stolen all the air from his lungs. Emma clung to him, whispering frantically, "We're leaving tomorrow morning. Do you hear me? This place isn't safe." Yet Thomas could not shake the words from his head. Beneath the boathouse, he saw again the rotting timbers, the waterlogged beams that dipped into the lake. Something was hidden there, waiting. Sleep was impossible that night. Every creak of the cabin felt like footsteps approaching. Every gust of wind against the walls like a voice carried from shore. When the first light of dawn finally seeped through the curtains, Emma began packing. She moved quickly, throwing clothes into their bags, her face pale and drawn. But Thomas lingered by the window, staring at the lake. "I have to see," he muttered. Emma spun around. "No, we're leaving. Today. Emma, please. If I don't, it won't stop." It came back twice. It spoke to me. It won't let me go until I do what it asked. She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "And what if it dragged you under? What if that's what it wants?" Thomas hesitated, her words sinking in, yet the pull was too strong. He could feel it, like a hook in his chest, tugging him toward the shoreline. He kissed her forehead gently. "Just give me 1 hour. If I don't find anything, we'll leave." Reluctantly, Emma followed. They made their way back to the boathouse in the gray morning light. The structure looked older than ever, its boards warped and swollen. The smell of damp was heavy in the air. The lake lapped gently beneath it, dark and secretive. Thomas crouched near the edge, peering into the shadows where the water disappeared under the beams. "There has to be something here." Emma stood with her arms wrapped around herself, glancing nervously at the empty shoreline. The holiday crowds had gone home. The lake was nearly deserted, eerily quiet. Thomas spotted something, a faint glint below the surface, caught between the pilings. He leaned closer, heart racing. "There. Do you see it?" Emma reluctantly knelt beside him. Squinting through the shifting water, something metallic caught the light, wedged against the beam. Without hesitation, Thomas slipped off his shoes and shirt. Emma grabbed his wrist. "Don't. Please." "I'll be quick," he assured her, though his own stomach was knotted with fear. He lowered himself into the cold water. It bit at his skin, stealing his breath, but he forced himself to dive beneath the beams. The lake muffled all sound, wrapping him in silence. He swam toward the glint. It was a rusted chain, thick and tangled, attached to something heavy. His fingers brushed against it, and for a moment he thought he felt fabric too, something soft but decayed, wrapped around the metal. His lungs burned. He kicked upward, breaking the surface with a gasp. Emma reached out, helping him back onto the dock. What was it? "A chain. Something's tied down there. I think—" He hesitated, shivering. "I think it's a body." Emma recoiled, her face draining of color. No, we're leaving right now." But Thomas shook his head. This is what it wanted. Someone died here, and no one ever found him. The wind picked up suddenly, whipping across the lake. The water beneath the boathouse rippled violently, though the rest of the lake remained calm. It was as if something below was stirring. Emma clutched his arm. "Thomas, please. If you keep digging, it won't stop with just showing itself." Before he could reply, the light appeared again, this time beneath the boathouse itself, glowing from the depths. It shone brighter than before, illuminating the beams, the chain, and for a split second, the unmistakable outline of a skeletal hand reaching upward. Emma screamed, stumbling back. Thomas stared, rooted to the dock, unable to breathe. The hand faded, but the light remained, pulsing steadily like a beacon. The voice returned, clearer now, echoing directly in his mind. "Free me?" Thomas dropped to his knees, clutching his head. Emma rushed to him, shaking him desperately. "You don't have to listen. Don't let it take you." But the pull was stronger than ever. He could feel the weight of years, decades, pressing against him. The story of a man lost to the water, chained beneath the boathouse, waiting for someone to uncover his fate. The desperation in the voice was unbearable. Thomas lifted his gaze to the water, lips trembling. "I'll try." The light flared brighter, as if an acknowledgement. Then it faded slowly, leaving the lake calm once more. Emma wept quietly, clutching his arm. "You're not going back in there. I won't let you." But Thomas knew the truth. Whatever haunted the lake would not release him now. He had seen too much, heard too much, and until he freed what lay beneath, the spirit would not stop. That night, as the wind rattled the cabin windows and the lake whispered against the shore, Thomas lay awake, his mind consumed by the image of the chain, the skeletal hand, and the voice that would not leave him. And deep down, he knew the 4th of July at the lake was only the beginning. Thomas could not shake the image of the skeletal hand. All through the night, as the wind whistled across the roof of the cabin and the lake murmured in its endless rhythm, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The voice replayed in his mind, the single plea that seemed heavier than any sound he had ever heard. "Free me." Emma turned in her sleep, restless, murmuring his name once or twice. But when dawn came, her eyes opened wide and anxious. She knew before he spoke what he intended to do. "You promised me yesterday," she whispered, sitting up. "You said 1 hour, then we would leave." Thomas sat at the edge of the bed, his back turned to her. His shoulders looked tense, burdened. "I know what I said, but I can't. Emma, if you had heard him the way I did, you'd understand. That man is trapped. Someone did this to him. He isn't at rest." Her voice cracked. "What if he doesn't want rest? What if he wants you instead?" Thomas stood, pulling on his jacket. His face was pale, but his eyes were determined. "I have to know the truth." The morning was gray. Clouds layered thick across the sky. The lake was restless, small waves breaking against the shore. The boathouse loomed ahead as they walked the narrow path, its timbers creaking under the shifting wind. The water beneath it seemed darker than anywhere else, as if shadows lived there permanently. Thomas had brought a coil of rope he found in the cabin, along with a heavy flashlight and a crowbar. Emma carried nothing, only her fear, which grew heavier with each step. She pleaded with him at the edge of the dock. "Don't go in. Please, Thomas. Let's go home. We don't belong here." He cupped her face with trembling hands. "I'll come back. I swear it." Then he slipped into the water. It was colder today, biting at his skin even harder than before. He took a deep breath and dove under the beams, his flashlight cutting through the murky depths. The chain appeared again, tangled and rusted, wrapped around something sunken in the mud. The outline was clearer now. Fabric clung to bone, a collapsed figure that had been hidden for decades. Thomas's lungs screamed for air, but he pressed closer. His fingers found the chain, following it up until he reached a heavy lock bolted into one of the beams. It had been fastened deliberately, binding the body to the structure. Whoever had done this had meant for it never to be found. He kicked upward, bursting through the surface with a gasp. Emma was kneeling at the dock, her eyes wide. "What did you see?" "There's a lock. Someone chained him there on purpose." His voice shook. This was an accident. It was murder. Emma covered her mouth with her hands, her breathing sharp. "Then don't touch it. If you break it, you'll bring him here to us." But Thomas could not stop. He dove again, this time with the crowbar. He wedged it against the lock, prying with all his strength. Rust crumbled under the pressure, flakes clouding the water. The lock groaned, stubborn, but finally snapped. The chain slithered free, sinking slowly into the mud. And then everything shifted. The lake roared around him, a sudden whirlpool forming beneath the beams. The water pulled at him, dragging him downward with terrifying force. Thomas flailed, his body spinning as the lake seemed to open below him. Through the chaos, the light returned, so bright it blinded him. He saw the figure, fully now a man with hollow eyes and a face marked by pain, drifting upward as if released from a cage. The voice thundered inside Thomas's skull. "Thank you." Then silence. The water stilled as suddenly as it had churned. Thomas broke the surface, coughing and gasping, gripping the dock with shaking arms. Emma screamed his name, hauling him back up with desperate strength. He collapsed on the boards, water streaming from his body, chest heaving. The lake was calm again, eerily calm. The light was gone. Emma clutched him tightly, her tears hot against his skin. "It's over. Please tell me it's over." Thomas looked out at the water. The surface reflected only the gray sky. No hand, no glow, no whisper. For the first time since that 4th of July night, the lake seemed ordinary, almost indifferent. But Thomas knew better. As they staggered back toward the cabin, he could not shake the final image from his mind. The man's face, young, desperate, betrayed. Who had chained him beneath the boathouse, and why? The question pressed on him with the same weight as the water had. That night, as they prepared to leave the lake for good, Thomas noticed something strange on the cabin porch. A single, waterlogged object lay there, as though placed deliberately. It was a leather wallet, cracked and swollen with age. He picked it up with trembling hands, opening it slowly. Inside was a faded photograph of a man in uniform, smiling proudly. It was the same face he had seen beneath the water. And below the photograph, barely legible through the damage, was a name, Matthew Clark. Emma gasped when she saw it. "Thomas!" That's the name on the plaque by the old war memorial in town. They said he went missing in 1954. He never came home from the lake. Thomas felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. Matthew had not simply vanished. He had been chained, silenced, hidden, and for nearly 70 years, the lake had held his secret. Until now, as they drove away the next morning, the shoreline shrinking in the distance, Thomas glanced back one last time. The water shimmered in the rising sun, calm and unbroken. No light followed, no voice called out. But deep down, Thomas knew the truth. He had freed the spirit of Matthew Clark, and in doing so, he had also inherited his story. The air around the lake grew heavier as the fireworks faded into silence. The night had returned to its usual darkness, yet something about it felt altered, as if the lake itself had exhaled after holding its breath for decades. Thomas stood on the dock, his palms still raw from the struggle with the rusted chain, his chest rising and falling in uneven waves. His eyes, wide and restless, traced the surface of the water, waiting for another sign, another flicker of light beneath the rippling blackness. But there was none. Behind him, Eleanor called his name again, softer this time, her voice trembling with fear and something else, curiosity. She had heard the splash when the chain snapped, when the weight had fallen into the lake with a hollow finality. She had felt the tremor in the wood beneath her bare feet. Now she stood in the doorway of the boathouse, her figure outlined against the dim glow of the lantern they had brought, her hands clutching the frame as though afraid to let go. "What did you see?" she whispered. Thomas turned to her slowly, his expression pale, his eyes refusing to meet hers. For a moment, he considered lying, dismissing everything as exhaustion or imagination. But the lake was not a place for lies anymore. Not after what he had just felt. The cold, invisible hands that had brushed against his skin beneath the water, urging him deeper, demanding freedom. "There was someone down there," he finally said, his voice breaking as though the words themselves carried weight. "Chained, waiting. I broke it loose." Eleanor's lips parted, but no sound came. Her breath faltered as she remembered the stories whispered every summer. Tales of a missing man in 1976, a local boy named Daniel Hayes who had vanished on the 4th of July after the fireworks. The search parties had scoured the woods and questioned the families, but the lake had always been silent, offering nothing but empty reflections of the sky. Until now, As the siblings stood frozen in the darkness, a ripple stretched across the lake. It was too wide, too deliberate to be from wind or current. Both of them turned sharply, their hearts pounding in unison. Out in the distance, just beyond the reach of the dock light, something broke the surface. A head, slick with water, hair clinging to pale skin. The figure was there for only a breath, long enough for them both to see it was not a trick of light or tired eyes. Then it sank again, leaving only expanding circles on the water's skin. Eleanor staggered back against the doorway, her hand pressed over her mouth to stifle a scream. Thomas gripped the edge of the dock, his knuckles white, his body caught between terror and a strange, aching relief. "Daniel," he muttered, almost to himself. The name came unbidden, carried from some half-remembered page of a newspaper clipping he had once seen in town, the photograph of a smiling boy frozen in 1970s black and white. The lake answered only with silence. Above them, the last trace of smoke from the fireworks drifted across the sky, and the celebration in town carried on, oblivious to the awakening at the water's edge. The world moved forward, but for Thomas and Eleanor, time had split. They knew now that the stories were real, that the 4th of July was not just a day of independence and fireworks. It was also a night of reckoning for the lake, a night when the forgotten refused to remain buried. Thomas reached for Eleanor's hand, his voice low, urgent. "We can't tell anyone." "Not yet." Her eyes widened with protest, but before she could speak, a sound rose from beneath the dock. Not the gentle lap of water, not the creak of wood, but a whisper, soft, wet, and close. Words they could not fully understand, carried up from the depths, yet heavy with intent. Both of them froze, listening, their breath caught in their throats. The lake was speaking, and it was not finished. The lantern flickered once, then went out, plunging them into darkness. And in that darkness, they both realized the 4th of July at the lake in Michigan would never be just a holiday again. It had become a promise, one that the water would demand they keep. The lantern's flame had died so suddenly that for a moment Eleanor thought the night itself had swallowed it whole. The siblings stood in total darkness, the kind of darkness that feels heavy, almost physical, as though it presses against your skin. The faint echo of the fireworks was gone now, leaving only the deep breath of the lake and the whisper that rose from beneath the wooden boards of the dock. It was faint at first, like a ripple of air, but the longer Thomas listened, the more certain he became that it was language. Words, not English exactly, but not entirely foreign either. He could almost make out syllables, soft, drawn-out sound that curled upward, as though someone were speaking through water. He froze in place, terrified that if he moved, the voice would stop, or worse, grow louder. Eleanor clutched his arm. Her nails dug into his sleeve, and her body trembled against his. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Thomas swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yes." "Don't speak too loud." The boards beneath their feet creaked as something shifted below them, not the gentle sway of water, but the deliberate weight of a body pressing upward against the dock. Eleanor gasped and stumbled back, nearly losing her footing. Thomas caught her wrist, steadying her, but his own hands were shaking. They both knew the stories. They had heard them whispered in town every summer since they were children. A boy who vanished on the 4th of July. A girl who drowned but was never recovered. A fisherman who tied his boat to the dock and never returned. The lake was beautiful by day, a place of shimmering light and families splashing in the shallows, but by night it carried a reputation, unspoken yet heavy, like the mist that rose after sunset. Thomas forced himself to kneel, pressing his ear against the warped planks of wood. The voice was clearer now. He could make out a name. His own. The sound of it made his blood run cold. "Thomas." He scrambled back, his breath ragged. Eleanor's eyes widened, reflecting what little starlight reached them. "It knows you," she said, her voice breaking. The water below shifted again, and suddenly the boards rattled as though something powerful had struck them from beneath. The siblings stumbled, Eleanor letting out a short, muffled cry. The lake was no longer silent. It was alive, moving with intent, as though it had waited all these years for this exact moment. Far out across the surface, the ripple spread again, but this time it did not fade. A pale figure rose just high enough for its face to catch the dim light of the moon. The features were distorted, waterlogged, yet unmistakably human. The mouth moved, forming words that carried across the still water. "Free me." Eleanor staggered back toward the boathouse, her hands pressed over her ears as if she could block out the sound. Thomas, however, was rooted to the spot. His mind raced, torn between fear and an inexplicable pull. Something about the voice felt familiar, as though he had heard it before long ago, in the fading echoes of childhood memories. He whispered, almost to himself, "Daniel Hayes." The figure sank back beneath the water, leaving only silence and the widening circles that lapped against the dock. For a long moment, the siblings stood there, listening, waiting for what might come next. The night pressing around them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "We need to leave. Now. Before it comes back." Thomas shook his head, his jaw clenched. "If I leave now, it will follow me." "You didn't hear it, Eleanor. It knows my name. It wants something from me." She grabbed his arm, desperate. "Then don't give it. Whatever it is, it's not meant to be freed." The boards beneath them creaked again, louder this time, as though something heavy had climbed onto the supports beneath the dock. The water slapped harder against the wood, steady and rhythmic, like the beating of a drum. And then came the sound of chains, rusted, dragging chains, echoing up from the depths, wrapping themselves around the silence of the night. Thomas and Eleanor turned toward the lake as one. Out beyond the dock, just where the shadows grew thickest, the shape appeared again. This time it was not just a head but shoulders, a torso, rising slowly, dripping with lake water. The chains were still wound tightly around its chest, glinting faintly in the moonlight. But they were broken now, hanging loose, swaying as though caught between two worlds. The figure raised its hand, reaching toward them. Eleanor screamed, stumbling backward into the boathouse, knocking over a crate that clattered loudly against the floor. Thomas did not move. He could not. His feet were rooted to the dock, his body rigid, his breath shallow. His eyes locked with the figures, and for the briefest moment, he thought he saw sadness there. Not anger, not vengeance, just sorrow. "Help me!" The voice came again, clearer now, rippling to the night air. Behind him, Eleanor cried out, "Thomas, please, come inside." But Thomas took a step forward instead, his shoes creaking against the damp boards. The figure's head tilted, water dripping steadily from its matted hair. The chains clinked softly, like bells muffled by the depths. Thomas raised his hand, almost without realizing it. And then, from somewhere far across the lake, a new sound broke the silence. The faint hum of a motor. Headlights appeared in the distance, bouncing as a small fishing boat cut through the water. Someone else was coming toward the dock. The figure froze, its eyes darting toward the approaching boat. The chains rattled once more, and then, in a sudden rush, it slipped back beneath the water, vanishing as though it had never been there at all. Thomas staggered back, gasping, his chest heaving. Eleanor rushed to his side, clutching his arm. "Did you see that? Did you see?" "I saw it," Thomas whispered, his eyes scanning the lake. "And it saw me." The fishing boat drew closer, the faint outline of a man visible against the glow of the motor's light. He waved, calling out, "Everything all right over there?" Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. He could still feel the cold weight of the voice inside him, echoing in the hollow spaces of his chest. Eleanor forced a smile, shouting back, "Yes, everything's fine." Her voice cracked, but the man either didn't notice or chose not to. He tipped his cap and steered the boat toward the opposite shore, humming a tune that carried faintly over the water. As the boat disappeared into the night, the lake fell silent again. The ripples faded. The chains no longer rattled. But Thomas knew it was not over. The voice had called his name, and it would call again. As the night drew deeper, the lake returned to stillness, but the stillness no longer felt natural. It was heavy, as though the water itself was waiting, listening, remembering. Thomas and Eleanor remained side by side on the dock, their hearts pounding, their bodies trembling from the encounter. They did not speak for a long time, because words felt too fragile for what they had just witnessed. When Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice was low, almost a plea. "Promise me, Thomas. Promise me we'll never come back here." Thomas looked out across the water. The moon had shifted higher, its reflection trembling on the surface, where only minutes ago a chained figure had risen to meet him. The sound of the name still echoed in his mind, the sorrow in those drowned eyes lingering in his chest. He wanted to promise her. He wanted to believe they could simply walk away. But he knew better. The lake had spoken. He exhaled slowly, his breath shivering in the night air, and whispered, "It's too late for promises." The words settled between them like stones sinking into the water. Eleanor shuddered, clutching his arm tighter, as if afraid the lake would reach for him again. Behind them, distant fireworks crackled faintly from the town, belated celebrations for a holiday that suddenly felt hollow. But here, at the quiet shore of the Michigan lake, the 4th of July had taken on a different meaning. Not freedom, not joy, but a reminder that some chains once broken will never truly be silent again. And though the water lay calm, Thomas knew that beneath its black surface, something was awake, something that now carried his name.